Let's take a look at SQL PowerShell. Now, the truth of the matter is, it's Windows PowerShell. I'm just using the SQL commandlets in PowerShell. PowerShell is one of the tools that kind of was drawn out of the parentage of Unix, where the Unix people used a lot of scripts to manage Unix, and it was great technology and it was very handy. One of the advantages of using PowerShell and using scripts is that other people create scripts and post them, and so you can download them and, of course, take your appropriate precautions to make sure what you're downloading, so run the script on a sample database that's isolated. But you can then save these scripts and then use them over and over again, which is, of course, the advantage of scripts. So another thing, PowerShell is a course in and of itself. It's a huge subject. It's a constantly evolving subject because PowerShell commands are expanding with each version of server, such as Windows Server, and each version of the server, such as Exchange Server and SharePoint Server and SQL Server, etc. So depending on the version that you have is what will run. Okay, that said, so we can start PowerShell. I'm just going to hit the Windows key. I'll just type in POWE and there's PowerShell, and I can right click it and I can just fire it up, or I can run as admin and PowerShell starts, and from here I can run with Windows Server PowerShell. But if I want to do it within SQL, life's a little easier for me. I'm going to open SQL Server Management Studio, and then AdventureWorks is already selected. So I'll just right click on it and I'll say Start PowerShell. And now you see it looks different than it was. Now I'm in PowerShell SQL Server because the SQL Server add-ins have been added. So from this point, I can proceed to do things within PowerShell. Now, let's just see what version we're on, what version of SQL. And I'm going to type invoke dash a SQL command SQLCMD. And now I'm going to enter a query, a select statement. Select doesn't have to be in uppercase. We just always do that. And what version am I on? So that's a global double A and version. Close my quote. Close it completely so I can put my semicolon in there, and then the semicolon should be before. That looks correct. So we'll just hit enter. Okay, there we go. I'm running SQL Server 2014. So here's a query just that I just ran against that using PowerShell. And of course you could save these scripts and run them over and over again. They're more handy for management tasks. So you can use PowerShell to manage your SQL version. You can actually use PowerShell to come through and install different versions of SQL. There's scripts you can download from TechNet, and you could just fill in the options that you want during your installation, and PowerShell will go through and install SQL for you, plus many, many other things. Microsoft has some excellent documentation on that. So if you go to this URL, it will get you started. The other thing, make sure you hit the lynda.com online library and search for Windows PowerShell, and you'll see a number of videos and a couple of dedicated courses just to PowerShell. And that's really where you want to start. You don't want to start PowerShell in SQL. You want to have a good understanding of PowerShell itself before you come over and utilize it within SQL. The SQL command utility, SQLCMD. Now, earlier we talked a little bit about PowerShell, which is really a Windows Server technology, but which has plugins that we can use within SQL. Right here, we're looking at the SQL command utility. That, if you're working with a single server, is easy to use and may be the way to go. PowerShell can do everything that the SQL command utility can do, plus much, much more. Now, the downside of PowerShell is that it's much more difficult to learn. Anything that can do more takes more effort to master. But I believe that PowerShell is the future and is the way to go. So those efforts are well rewarded. But we'll take a look at the SQL command utility. One of its advantages is it can be run within a batch file. So let's look and see what Microsoft says about it. These are the web pages you want to come in and take a look at over on MSDN, the developer network. As a matter of fact, this one here we're going to actually execute within our code. So this is fairly handy. And then there's another one, the SQL command utility, SQLCMD. And this will show you what you want to look at in this one. There's a number of code samples. What you want to look at is look at the options. There are really just lots and lots of options. And they go through, they being Microsoft MSDN, and describe all of these options. As you can see, there's just lots of stuff. This replaced a couple of other utilities that we used to use, and it's done a good job, but it's much less useful than PowerShell. So let's just take a look at it. The first thing I'm going to do is we'll open SQL Server Management Studio here, and I'm going to open a query. I'm going to open this one, and this is the query that we just looked at that is a sample from MSDN. The only thing different I did was I put in use AdventureWorks because that's where these tables live. Now, if you'll notice the red squiggles are never something you wouldn't look for. That means an error. And I put a comment in here that this is a DOS command. And it's illegal in normal mode. And let's execute it and see what happens. Okay, there's my error, saying, what are you doing, fool? But the results brought back my information up here. I'm selecting from sales offer in the product category. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to go up to the query menu, and I'm going to switch to SQL command mode and move off of my cursor. And now we'll go through and we'll execute it. And if you notice that I didn't label my C drive, it's just C drive. But here's the serial number, and here's all my directories, which is this DOS command. When I put the query editor into SQL command mode, then what was illegal, the DOS command, actually works. So if I take it out again, which I think I just did, and we execute it again so you see that. Now the advantage to this, of course, is the query editor gives me color coding, and then I can execute right away. Okay, now I'm going to look at examine a query for you. We're going to open this up and create test company. There's nothing fascinating within this. I'm just creating a database cleverly named test company. And this is my if exists drop, so I can run the code multiple times. And then use test company, and I'm creating a table, test company employee, and if exists drop it, and then create it. And then I'm populating it with me. That's my old man number. And Noor Savad, that's me. That's Ron Davis spelled backwards. With a name like Ron Davis, you got to be clever. And here's my suggested salary. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful? If anybody's hiring, there you go. That's our starting point. So here we go. So we've got this insert into, and I've got a drop database command in here, which is commented out. So let's go ahead and execute it just to make sure she executes. And let's refresh the database. And there's our test company. And there's our table. And there we got, and you can be assured that that's in there. So I'm going to come back over, and I'm going to uncomment this little code and execute it. And I should have put in there my use statement too. Test company, right click, delete, close existing connections, and okay, and let that delete. And she's gone. Okay, let me recomment that code out because I'm going to use this script here again. And we can close our scripts. Nope, don't save anything. And drop that down. Now what we do need is a command prompt. So I've got it pinned down here again to the taskbar, and I want to run it as admin. So what I'm doing, so you know here, I'm just right-clicking and then right-clicking again on the command prompt and run as administrator. So now I'm up and I'm running as administrator. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to change directories. So my good old CD, and that brings me to root. So now I want to change directories again. I've got my code in a file, code, so I'm going to change into that. CD, again, code. And now I'm in the code. And if I hit my dir, which is a directory command, if you're not familiar with DOS, which you may not be, You'll see I have the code in here. I have create test company, which we just looked at. And there's that mixed SQL and DOS. Now I'm going to execute the SQL command utility. SQL command is case sensitive. That said, I suggest in your career you pretend that everything is case sensitive now. Now, I put it in caps, even though you'll see most of the examples do not actually have it in caps. Now, I'm going to use the -S, and the -S switch is asking for what the name of the server is, and it's SQL 1. All right, that's my name of the server that I'm on. If I just execute this right now, you'll see that I switched over to SQL 1, but we're going to execute the whole thing. So now the -E switch, that's the trusted connection, and now the lowercase -I, and -I says, well, what's the name of the file? Which is why I ran that directory so I could type it right in. Because I tend to fat finger things, as you've seen throughout this course. Make sure you put in the extension .sql and let me stare at that for a second, and it looks good, and we'll execute the code. Okay, very good. Did you notice the speed of that execution? I can save this. I could save this as a batch file and then just rerun the batch file and doing whatever we want to do. So let's switch over and see what happened. Let's go back over to SQL Server Management Studio, call refresh. And there we are. There's my test company. There's my table. Let's see if we got any data. There we go. So there we are at my salary. That's my starting negotiation point. So, okay, there we are. And we'll go ahead and delete out this just to clean up my instance. And there's your SQL command utility. The options that you have available. We have direct attached storage, network attached storage, storage area networks, and the Azure blob. Direct attached storage, that's our traditional stuff where we just go in and hit a hard drive. Now, you'll notice here, this image is designed to show you that we have a problem, which you already knew. Moore's law is about 100 times per decade as far as the increasing in speed of the CPU. And yet our disk bound, shown at the bottom, standard drives with the platter and everything else are improving, but not nearly as fast. Now, we now do have SSDs, solid state drives, and they are much faster, as I've said a number of times in this course. I would absolutely advocate them. We use them internally, and they are much, much faster. But still, we have that problem. So you say, what's the good news? Well, the good news is, remember, with SQL 2014, we have in-memory databases where we put everything into the memory space of SQL. And as I've said, and will continue to say, the performance gain over even SSD is stunning. Network attached storage, this is easy. Don't use it. Why? It's unsupported by Microsoft. You have to put a flag in, and that's all you needed to hear. What you never want to do is reach out for support to Microsoft and 10 minutes into the conversation have them say, well, your configuration is not supported. SQL and storage area networks. What is a SAN? Okay, a SAN, storage area network, it's a collection of storage devices that are extremely high speed and also high priced. And they're attached to the servers. Now, they use a method of storage called block, which is really kind of beyond the scope of this course, and you really don't care. I will say, though, that actually managing a SAN is an expertise in and of itself, just like managing Exchange or SQL or Windows. So, why do enterprise use it? It's because of the speed, the flexibility, and the availability that SANs have. Even though they are complex and they do deliver optimal performance. Cache performance. This is one of the reasons that SANs are so doggone good. They have superior performance because we can configure a large amount of cache space. Cache space means where stuff is stored in memory. So that's normally a good thing. However, a SAN can provide services to multiple servers, so the cache space is shared. Drive contention. Well, SANs divide their SAN into things they call LUNs, L-U-N. And because the LUN is shared, you can experience I/O problems, between multiple instances of SQL using the same LUNs. And there's some methodologies for overcoming that. And that's all part of SAN management, which could be in and of itself a separate course. Azure Blob Storage. If you hear the acronym IaaS, that stands for Infrastructure as a Service. No doubt you've heard of SaaS, Software as a Service, and that's a really large industry and growing all the time. Infrastructure as a Service means that Azure Blob, binary large objects, we can take part of or all of our SQL and store it up into Azure Blob Storage. And this has some advantages. And I'm going to show you something else in just a second. I will mention that it's new with SQL 2014. For your blob storage, Microsoft has written a white paper that's quite extensive, and you can just go in there and download this white paper and read through it. There's Azure Blob Service, and download your white paper and take a look at it. System databases, there's 6 of them. Master, Resource, Model, MSDB, Distribution, and TempDB. The master, so called because it stores information about the entire server. So your logons are stored there, the way you configured the server is stored there, etc. Information that applies to the entire server. Now, this should come as no surprise. If SQL can't find the master, if the master's corrupt or something like that, it won't start. And if you actually ever do a search, corrupt master, in SQL, you'll come back with a number of different links. The resource database, that contains the system objects and the system views. You'll never see it in SQL Server Management Studio. There's a good reason you can't see it. We don't want you to fool with it. So you won't see it. You know it's there. Let it alone. Model. Now, the model, so called because when you create a user database, the model is the template that is used to output the user database. So what's that mean? The initial settings of the model will translate into the initial settings of your user databases. It contains the database catalog, which is necessary to create databases, and it can be modified. You can even modify model and add a table in so that every database you spit out as a user-defined database will have a certain table in it, which can have certain functionalities. MSDB, that stores information including SQL Server Agent, the service broker information, database mail configurations, log shipping if you're doing log shipping, and backup and maintenance plans are all stored there in the MSDB. This kind of makes sense. If you glance down through the list, you'll see that a lot of these are interrelated. The distribution database, that's for replication. And replication is really beyond the scope of this course. I will say this, that replication works and has worked for a number of iterations of SQL. It's not installed by default. We're not going to waste space. If you're not using replication, then we just don't install it. TempDB has turned into quite the workhorse now. Its role seems to increase with every iteration of SQL. We store temporary data and objects, and SQL itself uses TempDB extensively. To optimize it, you need to use the simple recovery model. Log space will automatically be reclaimed, so it will keep it smaller. Allow auto grow as required. We'll just grow that on out until we run out of space. Now, you can see, depending on your application and the complexity of your queries, the temp database will grow rapidly because the system needs it to store information as it's going along and trying to figure out how to execute this really large query. Maintenance, regular backup. These are still databases and they need maintenance also, so include them in your maintenance plans. Monitor. these databases, particularly Monitor TempDB. Never query a system database directly. We just don't want you to do that. We want you to use the internal tools, the system views, etc., to gather information, not querying directly. I just switched on over, and now I'm in SQL Server Management Studio. And over here in databases, if I expand this out, here's my 4. Master Model, MSDB, and TempDB. And you notice you can't see resource. Why? Remember I said you can't see it. We're just not going to show it to you. And I don't have distribution. I don't have distribution because when we installed this, we did not include distribution. Now, if I want to get some information, I'm going to open System Query. And these are just a couple of views in here. Select All From. Now, the first thing I want to know is where are we storing this information? So that's sys.masterfiles. And that comes down and shows me where I'm storing the different information. So database IDs and file IDs, etc. And here's master log, tempdb, temp log, etc. So this gives me that information. And here's the physical location. If you watched me copy databases on over, you saw that I dumped them into a certain physical location, and there it is. Okay, now let's look at everything that's within sysobjects. Notice I'm using an internal query, the sysobjects. I'm not querying directly. So now this tells me all the sysobjects that are in there. And as you can see, a lot of information down there, all the different system objects that I have. Now, here's model. So if I right-click model and go into properties, and I go into, I think it's files, here's my initial size. So if I want to increase my initial size, I can do it right here. Now, let me show you a little feature you may or may not be familiar with. I think this is really a cool feature. I'm going to script action to new query window. Cancel out of that. Okay. Now you see, use master go, alter database, model, modify file, and there's the size modification. So rather than using the GUI to do it, I can script this stuff on out and put it into a new query, which is handy because now from here, if I wanted to make other modifications or whatever it is I want to do, then I can change this script. Now I'm going to say this, even though you already know it. Before you make any changes like that, you're going to come in and you're going to call back up so that in case we blow it up, we can always get back to where we were. So there's your system databases. Okay, let's take a look at creating user databases, which is really a pretty easy little operation to perform. I'm in SQL Server Management Studio, and you remember from the last video that we ran, a user database comes off of the model database by default. So however the model is initially configured, when you create a user database, that's the template that's going to be used. So here we're in Management Studio, and I'm just going to, in Object Explorer, click Database, right-click, New Database, and I'll give it a name, User1. And that's fine. And you see here's this initial size and the log size, etc. There's my options. Again, all of this comes off of model. See the correlations, the default, the recovery model. And if I wanted to change it, I would just pull this down here and say change it to simple. And now I'm going to say OK. And there we are. Wasn't that fascinating? I can also do it in T-SQL. And if I do it in T-SQL, then I can transact SQL, which is a script. Then I can save that and execute it. I can actually even save it as a template if I want to, and then just bring up my template. Let me show you an easy way to do that. I'm going to right-click Database again, and I'll say New Database, and I'm going to call this one User2. And now I want to go in and let's go in Options again and change the recovery model again over to Simple. And we'll say Script action to new window, cancel out here. Okay, now we have created a script which will create our database for us. And you see, all I would need to do, if I change this into a template, this automatically gets changed into a parameter. And then we can just tab through and change the parameters if we want to. Or here you could just do a find replace. But there we've got the script, and if we execute it, refresh our databases, we've got user 1 and user 2, which, let's clean it up. And we'll say OK. And it would have been faster if I would have killed that. And let's do this. And there we go. So as I said, very easy to create user databases with a number of different functionalities. Again, using the GUI or using T-SQL. So let's take a look at creating a little maintenance plan. So I'm obviously in SQL Server Management Studio. And under management, if I attempt to start a manager job right now, let me do that just to show you an error. So what that's saying is I can't do it because SQL Server Agent is not running. There is a T-SQL script you can run to do that, or my friend, which is why I pinned this in the beginning, I happen to like to work with Configuration Manager. So I'm going to start SQL Server Agent. I'm going to right-click it and say Start, and let her fire up, and switch back over, and you'll notice SQL Server Agent is running. So now let's go into maintenance plans. I'm going to right click and I'll use the wizard. And my wizard pops, and maintenance plan, some clever name. Let's just call this MP1. Run a service account, that's fine. And you see this single schedule or separate schedules for each task. And I could change this in here. And this is the standard. We've been using this dialog box since, I think, SQL 7.0 or maybe even 6.5, but whatever. I'm sure it wasn't 6.5. Okay, anyway, so you can set up a schedule here. We're not going to do that. And now we'll go next. And we'll do a full database backup. Backup database full, that's correct. And when I go next down here, it's going to say databases, select, and back up all databases, system databases, and we'll back up our friend AdventureWorks 2014 and say OK. Back up to disk, that's correct. And we'll go next. Where to send a report, you would just navigate into your location here, or you can email at the report. You see, select file and put it in wherever. We'll go up to default. You can email it then, which we're not going to do either. And this looks good, and we'll call finish, and all green, which is what we want to see. The report's pretty worthless. I'll show it to you. See? Same as here. And we'll call close, and there is MP1. As a matter of fact, if we expand out SQL Server Agent, there's MP1 right now. And if I take MP1 and right-click it, I can like view history, and here's my history, which is nothing because I haven't done anything. So I'll right-click the plan down here, and I'll say Start Job. Close, and now view history. Now I have a history up here. You can see the history of the plan. Very good. Okay, let's close that out. So now let's take a look at a manual one. I'll right click and I'll go new maintenance plan, and I'll call this manual 1. Manual, let's call it MP1. And we'll say OK. And now a description in here. Now I need to add a task down here. I need to see the toolbox. There she is. Okay, and again, let's just back up a database. So I'm going to take that object and drop her down in here. Now, red's never good. It's telling me, okay, I see what you want to do. This object's the backup. But what it's not saying is where do we connect into. So I'm going to double click it. And now the backup type is full. That's fine. Select the database once again. Let's back up AdventureWorks. And we'll say, okay, back up to disk. It's going to use the local server connection. If I was tying to something else, I would, again, just go into the new and fill out the new server connection information right there. And destination, I can look at the other things, C program, etc. and different options that I would have. So I can set that up in here also. Okay, and here, view T-SQL. And there's my T-SQL. Whenever you view these T-SQLs, you got to have caution depending on the interface you're in, because sometimes you can copy and paste it into the query editor and it will work. And other times you can copy and paste it into the query editor and it will not work. So just be cautious of that. And we'll say, okay. And now we're good. And I'm going to say save. And we'll close this. And let's refresh. There's manual MP. Here's manual MP down here, and I can right click it again, start job, close. Cool. And I can right click in here, view history, and there's my history of my subplan 1. So there's your maintenance plans, both manual and your wizard. Now, let's take a quick look at something else. We installed SQL Server Data Tools, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And I want to come in, I'm going to do a new project, Integration Services project. And I really don't want a directory created, so this is fine. And we'll say okay. And this always irritates me. I don't care about the samples. So what we're going to do, I'm going to come up here to packages, I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to add an existing package. And it is stored in SQL Server and over on my servers, SQL1. Where we just did it. And the package path, there's manual, and we're okay, and we'll call okay there. Let me delete the default package because it irritates me. I don't need it. Clean up anything. Don't put anything in there you don't need. Here's manual. I'm going to double click it, and now it opens, and now I can see it in Integration Services. This tells you that the maintenance plan is creating an Integration Services package. Therefore, I can modify Integration Services. So, for example, let's take, if I can find it, here's a send mail task. I do not have mail configured, thus I have the red arrow, but don't worry about it. So right now, what I want to do is I'm going to take, I clicked on this green arrow coming down, it's called a precedent constraint. They're pretty cool. And if I can get my mouse to work, there we go. I've now connected it to send mail. And now I don't want it. The green means good news. If I right click, I'm going to put down here and say failure. So now the modification I just did to this plan, which was trivial, is that when the backup database task executes successfully, it's going to generate a report, as we've already seen. But now if I save this and then push it back over to SQL, what's going to happen is on failure of that database, I can send mail, and I could configure the send mail task in Integration Services to send email to whoever.